What's up, guys, and welcome back to Tech Plant. 20-year-old me would have been really proud of this moment. This right here is my first actual official hydroponics rig. Funnily enough, while I was actually completing this build, and that's what this whole video is going to cover, is the entire build, there's custom 3D printed parts which I'm going to release, and we'll talk about that later. But while I was building this, I got a reminder on Facebook, one of those 13 years ago, which was the time that it was. It showed my very first hydroponics rig that I ever created. And it was really funny because this was back when I didn't have really any money at all. I was working a part-time job in an ice rink, and it was the best I could do. Plus, the technology really wasn't there 13 years ago, at least affordably. Grow lights just were not a cheap thing. So I was using a shop light, and things were leggy, as you can see. But it has always been my dream as a young guy to build a really cool hydroponics thing. And I was thankful for my parents that they even let me build that up in my room, because there was always a leaking hazard, and it almost filled the pipe with roots and would have pumped water everywhere. But anyways, let's get back to what this thing is. So this is actually a completely mobile rig here. And I think this is pretty darn awesome because, one, it's custom made with all kinds of stuff you can get in a hardware store, and with this sweet spider farmer shelf that I already did. This is basically the second part series, but I've already got this thing all wired up and rigged up nicely, and it was the perfect platform for me to try and build this thing out, because it is quite a big, robust shelf. And it's got these sweet little trays, so if I do have leaks with this one, it'll be okay. Now, like I said, I already had done a video about this shelf, and this is going to be a part of a greater 4-part series because I do want to show you some stuff as it grows out and as it functions, but this one is really just about the build. Now, thankfully for this shelf, since I tore my entire plant room apart, I was able to use this for a while to keep my plants alive, but now I moved them to a different area, and I'll do a sort of dedicated video about that. It's kind of be a short and sweet one. I'm more experimenting with the grow tent, but I moved most of the stuff off the shelf into there, and it worked really well as just a mobile unit to move some of my sickly plants around, just because everything's suffering with the new build. But again, I knew this platform was going to be the one I wanted to build this on, because I like the idea that it's mobile, and especially with how my basement is, I have to move things around often just to get certain things done or achieve certain results, so the fact that this thing is on wheels is excellent. This entire build is based around some do-it-yourself kind of hardware shop stuff. This is just a gutter downspout. I chose the vinyl kind. You can do a metal, but I'm not a fan of how much sharper it can be, and just it can rust if you scrape the paint, and I don't know. I'm not a fan of it. Maybe it's made of something that doesn't rust. I don't know. I don't want to use it. I like the plastic. I think it's a little easier to work with, cut, and everything else. So this you can get at your hardware store, 10-foot sections for about $10 a piece, I want to say. And then I'm using PVC pipe, and we'll talk about why I chose the 3/4 dimension, because I was going to try something bigger, but this is just what I settled on. So again, you guys can get these parts easily. The only thing that you can't get, but you can print at home, is the 3D printed parts. And the 3D printed parts are actually these end caps here. That's kind of what ties everything together. Really, you need a good way to sort of sync up the actual piping with the gutters, and there's not a lot of off-the-shelf components that you can do that with. There's a lot of YouTube videos that will do this. Some of the other options are not going with the gutter and going with all PVC, much bigger PVC piping, but I find that gets pretty expensive pretty quick, especially when you size up, and I'm just not a big fan of that. And the way the water kind of wells towards the very bottom, it's just not easy to drill in. This flat surface is much easier in my opinion. So anyways, I did some shopping on Etsy and online, looking at what was available, and in my opinion, a lot of the choices out there are really poor. The way they're printed are really brittle, easy to break off, and just not robust. So I went and designed the most robust part I can even imagine. You'll see the features on this thing. It's pretty sweet, and I think you're gonna want these files if you want to 3D print this stuff yourself, or have a friend do it. Now, the parts are a little more robust and consume a little more plastic, but I think it's worth it if you're going to deal with anything with water, and especially with pumps, because if it fails, you're just going to pump water all over wherever you have it set up. This might be kind of a long video, but I think some of you might enjoy the whole process behind everything, and that's what I'm going to try and show you and explain. So the first thing I did is take the gutter. I tried scanning it into a scanner, a slight section of it, and then from there I tried to turn it into an SVG, and I just was having a problem making it perfect, and it ended up being a little too thin and just too hard to manipulate. So I do use a really easy CAD software called Tinkercad. Some of you might be laughing, but I'm proficient in it, and it's until I can spend some time learning the learning curve of some more professional software, it's what I use, and I just ended up modeling kind of the gutter. And so this is how it all starts, a nice little ribbed gutter, and that is what I'm going to use as my inset, so that way the part can sort of accept the gutter. You know, it's kind of a male-female part sort of thing. Once I got through there, I did test some different size holes. So at first I was going to go with, I think, 1 1/4 inch. I forget what the sizes are, but I realized once I got to the hardware store that, wow, this is a nice big robust pipe. the expensive part of the pipe is not what I was worried about, but I was actually quite worried about the components. So if you can see here, there's a lot of elbow joints, and I think at the size that I first printed this for, each one was like $1 something, which adds up quick. Whereas with this 3/4 inch, everything was about 60 cents. So almost double the cost just to go with a bigger pipe, and I don't think you'd get the added benefits, especially given that I'm using a smaller gutter and not the massive gutter. So that is kind of why I chose the hole size I did. And so you can kind of see here, this is what the bigger hole would have looked like, which is nice, and then you consume a little more or a little less plastic 3D printing. But with the smaller hole, it just seems to be cheaper overall. So there's some kind of cost benefits that I'm kind of weighing when I make these choices, but that's what I did. Then I had some of the original parts that I tested out. These are failed prints that you're seeing here, but I also will just like do a sliver. That way I can get an idea of like, will it fit the pipe? Because sometimes the printer isn't quite as accurate as like the dimensions you might put in there. So it's always good to print small portions so you don't waste a lot if you find out it doesn't work. So at first I just had a simple hole here, but then I came up with a lot of like better ways to seal things. I noticed when I put the pipe inside, like the actual hole, that the tolerance was like there, but you can't go too tight because then some of the printers might not work as well. But if you go too loose, then it's really wobbly, and I still need to get the silicone in there. And I was really nervous about the seal because with this style hydroponics, you're actively pumping water. It's not like a deep water culture where there's just a vat of water. Once you involve a pump, anytime things can go wrong, and the pump is on a timer, which it traditionally is, you can just pump water everywhere without even realizing it. So you can empty out like a 5-gallon thing of water on the floor essentially. So I'm always really nervous about leaks, so I over-engineered this part significantly. Here's more of like a test piece to it as I was sort of figuring things out. So the original one is right here, and this is just like a straight hole, and I noticed that like I didn't like how it's sealed. I mean, it still is robust, and I leak tested it, but I wasn't a fan of it. And that's kind of when I went with this like over-engineered part. And this one is engineered in interesting ways, in 2 ways for, actually 3 ways for better seals. The first really cool way, and you'll see the footage of it, is I did have a hole that you can inject the silicone into it. And then there's an internal ring that goes around the pipe. And so the theory is you put the pipe in, hold it in there nice, after putting a little silicone in there, put your gun in there, inject it, it should fill the whole like cavity, making like a perfect seal around the pipe, and then ooze out and fill out the air gaps. And it worked flawlessly in the video footage. You'll see it. I pulled the pipe out after doing it, and I can see it filled the cavity perfectly. It oozes out, pushes the air out, and just made perfect seals. It was awesome. On top of that seal, which is already like overkill, I did do a little bit of like a inset on the outer ring where the actual pipe fitting would hook up into, and that's another pocket of air that you can fill completely with silicone. And as you push the parts together, the silicone gets squeezed out and makes a secondary seal. So you get 2 seals on that pipe that are like dedicated to sealing it, beside just what you can get in the actual tunnel. So again, this part is super robust, it's very heavy, it's very strong, and it's pretty much bomb proof as far as leaking where the pipe is. The next problem is with the actual gutter and getting that to interface well. I found it was pretty tough to get some of the stuff in the cracks, so that's why there is like the grooves that match up a little more deeper inside, and then there's 2 spots where there's actual pockets where the silicone can sort of build up and create a little more of a robust seal. I didn't want like super thin bits where like the plastic is sort of pinching together where the silicone can't quite get in there and have leaks. So I made big gaps where there's like clear space between plastic and plastic so the silicone could fill those voids. So again, if you shop around on Etsy, I think you'll quickly see how, I don't want to say they're bad designs because they're just cheap designs, but this thing is like way more robust. You're not breaking this piece. There is no little like pipe things that stick out. It's all designed to be really strong and really durable, and I think you can see that based on like what I've shown you. So now that we've kind of got over that whole part, because that is pretty much the most like integral part of this, without these caps nothing works, we can kind of get back into more of the assembly of this. Once you've got your end caps like 3D printed and you got them all like glued up, we do have to actually take the gutter and do the modifications, and the spacing is really going to be kind of up to you and what you decide. So I'm going to try and grow some heads of lettuce, and I might alternate in between something that grows a little more upright, maybe some Swiss chard just to give some room, or I can just like forego a hole if I really need to. But I wanted to add enough holes now before modifying later. Like I said, you can always cover a hole if you find out that there's just not enough space for the heads of lettuce you're growing, or whatever you're growing. But I want to start with a lot more than maybe I needed, just so I don't have to come after the fact and like crank on it with a hole saw and everything. So you gotta have to measure that out and figure out what you want. It kind of depends on what you want to grow. Mine are about, I want to say 5 inches, 5 3/4 on center from each hole. How I got there, it ended up just being kind of random. I just started from the middle and kind of felt out how it looked and the proportions, and it felt right to me. So maybe you can look online and find something that's a little more accurate as to how the spacing should be. But yeah, you're just going to drill these holes in here. Just be careful, you go slow. I noticed when I was drilling, the drill would want to like bend the plastic before drilling, and then when it finally punches through, the plastic would shoot up and catch kind of quick, and that can cause some damage to it. So you really want to go slow and be very careful. Just a reminder as well, make sure you're doing like test pieces. So again, I had this little test piece that I really tried out a lot of my ideas. I tried the hole sizing. You definitely don't want to just like go crazy with it and then find out that you wasted money on materials. There was a few instances where I had some pipes that I cut wrong and just a little bit of waste that I could have avoided if I did a little more testing. I mean, I did quite a bit, as you saw with just the 3D printed parts and how I iterated. But again, if you're going to do a project like this, make sure you have test pieces and really like get your ideas out there. Because I think total, not counting the shelf and the lights, I want to say I probably spent $70 on all the supplies, including like the 3D printed plastic and stuff. So to kind of screw it up at the end, it just would suck to waste it all, and then you'd have to dismantle it, and it's kind of hard to reuse it once you've kind of ruined it and glued it up. So make sure you're testing stuff as best you can. Once you've got your gutter prepared and then you've got your end pieces all glued up, it's really important that you're like testing out the layout. So there was a few times where I almost made crucial mistakes on how I glued the end caps on. There is an order. You can't just slap them on in any order. They need to go on in a specific way for everything to match up. You can see right here on this finished product kind of how crucial it is. If this one isn't lined up with this one facing up, it would be a total mismatch. And along with the U shapes on the end, if I were to flip those on accident, I would basically have two pipes facing the wrong way. Now you could elbow joint your way back around, but it's going to cost you more money and it's going to look a little more clunky, and even might be difficult to get it to work where you've got gravity causing issues with the water. So really plan this out, dry fit everything, stack it the way you did. I mean, that's what I did. I would put it on the shelf, kind of dry fit it and make sure it made sense to me in my mind, because again, I almost screwed up multiple times. The other thing you really got to pay attention to, because the issue that comes into play here is as you're injecting the silicone inside of the actual parts, you only have so much time before it starts to get gummy. I mean, you got more than minutes, so it's not like it's that crucial, but as it gets more gummy, the seal gets worse because it kind of starts clumping up and like half curing instead of like a nice good seal. And one of the big problems I did is I was so worried about trying to get this thing on because my tolerances were a little too tight with these on certain ones, that I put it on upside down completely. And luckily I realized it like within 2 or 3 minutes where I could rip it off and like re-put it on. But again, if you let 10 minutes go by and then you pluck it off and re-put it on, it might not be good. So learn from my mistakes and just really pay attention to your layout. It's crucial. If you screw it up, you got to make whole new pieces, and then the 3D printing takes time, it takes money, more like elbow joints. It's not something you want to do. So make sure you're really dry laying out things and really thinking about it. I tried to illustrate that in the footage a little bit, but again, I really want to be adamant in this because I don't want to see you guys ruin your project or just waste like I almost did. I mean, I came really close. Luckily, I noticed it. As far as like the final piping and the actual plumbing of it, that wasn't too difficult. The nice thing is PVC, if you get the PVC glue and the purple stuff, it goes together pretty good. It's just trying to get everything sized and aligned pretty darn well. It's not super easy to do like any bends. You'll see here I have sort of an angle here because I wanted to mount the pole to the actual shelf, because with the sense of the whole like 3D printed part with the silicone, it's not like it's bonded PVC. So the joints, if you really cranked hard on this and got some good leverage, I'm sure you could totally perforate that silicone seal. So I really wanted to sort of secure things to this shelf in a way. And down here I've got some zip ties holding it up. So that way we're not putting extra pressure on those seals. The nice thing about silicone is it is flexible, so it does give us some leeway. But again, you don't want to be cranking on this 3D printed stuff, or especially the seals. And the problem is a lot of the PVC gutter is pretty flexible, so there's just a lot of room for error. So you want to be really careful when plumbing this stuff up and make sure you get your lengths right, so that way you're not putting like extra tension or bends because the pipes are too big or too small. Luckily, too small is probably a little better in a sense that you just don't insert it all the way. You can sort of just like fit until it fits. But again, this stuff goes together pretty easy, pretty quick. It slides right in there once you get it wet with the glue and stuff and the solvent, or I guess the solvent is what it is. Dry fitting, not so much. So you got to understand that most of these PVC parts, and you should measure it. There's a lip inside. Usually it's about an inch in on both. So whatever your distance is here, you're going to want to add about an inch. I did a slight bit less just to give myself some leeway, because for whatever reason I'm never like perfectly accurate. But yeah, the plumbing is kind of just stuff I made up. Another sort of key feature here is if you look at some of these parts, like why did I extend this up this high here instead of just putting it right down here? Well, in the future I might want to do a different layout, so I figured I could slice it here at this point, and I can put on another fitting, even like a screw fitting or something. It gives me a little bit of reuse in the future. Same with here. The slightly longer pipes allow you to basically cut and put another fitting on if you were to use it in a different configuration. So kind of nice to give yourself some room, because again, with the nature of this, because these are glued onto these 3D printed parts, if you want to redo something, you kind of have to start fresh. You know, it's just the way it is. So that's why I gave myself some leeway. Now, there is one thing I did not really care for in this build, and I didn't find a good way to get around it. Having a good size reservoir, and this might change here, I'm not sure, but this consumes quite a bit of the shelf, and then I can't really utilize the lower lights, and that's just wasted space. Now on the far end I can put another like shallower container and maybe do deep water culture, and I'm still looking for a bin that will fit the length of this shelf and not be too wide, and it's still like about this short, because if I can find that, then I'll turn the whole bin into a deep water culture setup. But I can't really do two bins because I don't want to try and bond two of them together, and I want the reservoirs to also feed up here. So I kind of would like some like hybrid thing, but that might be for video number 3. I think it would be pretty cool concept to add that to the bottom, and then we can have sort of like the, I think they call these NFT styles, nutrient film, I forget what it's called. You can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. I forget what this style is called, but there's deep water culture where you could grow plants right in the bin. I think I'm going to try and finagle the bottom shelf to do that. That way I don't have wasted space. Or I can use the extra area for like where I'm starting seeds, because ideally I'm going to start seeds like every week and kind of keep the system going, so that way I don't have like, what is it, 7, 14, 28. I don't need 28 heads of lettuce all at once. So that's probably the plan, and that'll be for like video 3 and 4. So there's some cool stuff coming up with the shelf, and I might evolve on things. I want to show you how to automate it with timers, but again, that's for the next video. It is running right now, so you might hear some like gurgling as like air passes through or as it starts to drain. But overall, I'm extremely pleased with this project. Again, this would have made like 20-year-old me super proud. This was something I would have loved to achieve back in the day, but I'm finally there at a point in my life where I can dedicate some time and try and make this. So I'm really looking forward to growing out some food in here for my family and just testing this thing out. It was a ton of fun, and now that I've sort of done one, I want to do more. And so I think this build turned out really awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed this and everything, and hopefully you're interested in these parts. I'll have a link to the shelf in the description because I do think it's a pretty good setup. These lights are pretty well fit for, I think, any sort of like leafy green vegetable. So I have no fear that things are going to grow well here. And just the form factor is pretty nice. The wheels, I like the upper rail system for putting all the electric stuff. Overall, it's pretty sweet. It does have some nice deep trays for if there are leaks, because most of my leaks are going to drain back in here. Luckily, there hasn't been any, but still, I do like this whole safety net in case things plug up. Overall, it's a pretty nice system. So I'm thankful to Spider Farmer for providing me the shelf, because it's a pretty sweet build. With that all being said, if you made it this far, you're probably one of the OGs, I guess, or you really enjoyed this content. I am going to be starting a Patreon. I've been kind of waffling on this for a long time, and you know, a lot of people want to have the 3D files, and so I think what I'll do is just make a Patreon where you have access to all the 3D files that I ever produce. I have a lot more hydroponics content coming up. I have some like 3D printed terrarium projects that I've already released and am releasing that are really cool in my opinion. I do have some moss pull content I'm going to toss in there, and so it might be worthwhile to be a part of the Patreon, because that'll give you access to these files, and as the library of files build up, it'll just become more and more valuable to anyone who wants to be a part of this channel. So if you have any other suggestions for the whole Patreon idea, I'm open and willing to listen, and if you have any suggestions for what to grow in here, put it in the comments. But yeah, I will have a link to a Patreon. If you want to be a part of this whole craziness and you want access to these files, I think that's probably the best way to do it. They're pretty darn robust. I can almost promise you're not going to find a better file out there with at least these like over-engineered features. There are other files out there, but I think these are pretty solid. So anyways, I guess that's my little like plug for the Patreon. There is a Discord now that I opened up. I just started using that on, I sent it on Instagram. If you're not following me on Instagram, there's a lot of like daily posts on there and stuff. But the Discord has been pretty fun. A lot of cool people in there. There's a bunch of different sections, and it's the best place to really communicate with me. That's free, so there is no, you don't have to pay to be a part of my Discord. Just join it. I'm in there talking with people throughout the day. It's a lot of fun to have conversations, come up with ideas, talk about this kind of stuff. So if you're interested, there's also a link in the description. I'd love to have you in the Discord. It's a lot of fun. And I think that pretty much is the whole like spiel at the end here. So I'll probably do a more formal launch of the Patreon. But if you, like I said, if you made it this far and you think this is interesting, I think you'd be interested in the whole 3D printed like Patreon thing. So there's that. And there's going to be other like files and digital stuff. But for now, that's kind of what the goal is. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this build. I know I really loved it. I think it actually turned out. And I hope you're interested in the next 2 videos of this series of things actually growing out and some other modifications I might do to it. So thanks for watching, guys. May your plants go strong and healthy. Keep experimenting. I'll see you next time.